And today I'm very honored to have as a guest a dear friend of mine. His name is Gareth Quested. I know you've heard me say this many times before that I'm honored to have a guest here, but no, I say this truly. As I said, he's a dear friend of mine, and it's nice to finally get him in front of the cameras, inshallah. And we will be using this opportunity as ever to explore the journey of our dear brother. I'm sure for those of you who have been watching the show so far will have realized that everybody's story is unique. However, there are also very important, there's an important thread, an important or very vivid consistency in all of these stories, despite the fact that they're all different, inshallah. And I'm sure Gareth's story will illustrate that as well. Without further ado, I'd like to start by saying Assalamu alaikum, dear brother Gareth.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure, and thank you deeply for coming on the show. Might sound like a silly question. It is a silly question, but for the benefit of our viewers, what is your ethnic background?
I'm white and completely English as well.
Completely English, Anglo-Saxon, yeah?
Yeah.
Inshallah. And so, therefore, I would assume that you were born and brought up in the UK.
Yes. I was born just outside of London, lived there all my life.
Lived there all your life. And your family background, are you an only child or...?
No, I've got two older sisters, but there's only 4 years between myself and the oldest one, so we're quite close in terms of age.
Okay.
So.
Cool. And alhamdulillah, your parents are both still alive as well, yes. Obviously. And would you consider your relationship with your sisters to be quite close?
We get on, but I think we've always had sort of different outlooks on life and different interests. So we can rely on each other and so on. There's no conflict or anything like that, but sure. I wouldn't say we're close necessarily in all ways. Sure. So.
And your parents as well?
Yeah, same sort of story, to be honest. We've always been quite a close family in a sense, in one way, but I do have obviously different interests. But we can all rely on each other, and there's no sort of family conflict or anything like that.
Sure. So there's no vendettas outstanding or anything like
Thankfully
that.
Thankfully not. No.
Alhamdulillah. Good. Would I be wrong to assume that your background, your religious background, would be from basically were you a Christian before you converted to Islam?
Before I converted, I was an atheist. Apart from a very short period beforehand when I became agnostic, sort of turning point period, but I was an atheist beforehand.
Okay, and this is an assumption. I remember saying this on the previous show, that it's important that we understand this, your background prior to Islam, because sometimes us Muslims get a bit preoccupied with, if you like, the differences in the nuances of our religion. You know, some Muslims pray this way, others pray that way, and then we get bogged down in the minutiae of Islam when we're living in an environment where majority of the people are actually not following any religion, be it Christianity or Islam, or following, they basically either agnostic, as you said you were for a period, or an atheist.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people, when I tell them I've converted, they say, "Oh, so you were a Christian beforehand?" It's like, well, there's no reason to assume that I would have been. Nominally, this is a Christian country, but most people aren't Christians. Some will say it, but then you ask, do they believe in Jesus as the Son of God and all this, and they'll say no. So I think there's an implicit assumption that this is a Christian nation and people practice Christianity. If you look at church attendance, people don't go to church that much. Yes. My own family, for example, there's no one really in my family who's religious. And so when we often have discussions as Muslims about how to talk with Christians and so on, but we kind of ignore the fact that most people don't believe in the concept of God in general, let alone the nature of God and so on.
So maybe our approach needs to change, and maybe looking at it rather than trying to get people interested in Islam through Christianity, maybe trying to approach this propagation program from a different perspective.
Yes, I think in terms of how to deal with people who aren't Muslims is you've got to acknowledge what their own perspective on life is. And it's not just that people are atheists. I think most people are either agnostic or would say they're Christian but don't believe in it. I think there's just a non-interest in religion as a whole. I mean, a lot of people in this country won't have a particularly positive view of Christianity. They'll think it's some sort of outdated thing that they used to have in this country, and it's a nice bit of heritage, and that's it. So I think in terms of discussing with other people, you've actually got to realise where they're coming from themselves. And generally, there are a number of practicing Christians in this country. Let's be realistic, there are. But most people aren't interested in religion at all, let alone being Christian.
Sure. But in terms of your extended family, do you not have anybody who would fall into the category of being religious Christian?
I have a couple of aunts on both sides of the family who go to church, but it's never really discussed. I think as it is for many people in this country, it's a very private affair, so it's nothing really that comes up.
Right, so it's not something that they would highlight to...
No, it's not really obvious in a sort of general day-to-day, no.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you very much. So a bit about your background in terms of, where you grew up, what the setting was like and the influences on you in those early years, those formative years of your life.
I grew up in Surrey. It's a fairly sort of white middle-class area. And
I see there's a lot of footballers who live down there as well, apparently.
Yes, it's some fairly affluent areas. I went to a grammar school. It was largely white students as well. So there wasn't much diversity at school, but there were a few Muslims there. But it wasn't really an issue or something that brought up that they were Muslims. They were just Muhammad, who, oh yeah, he's probably a Muslim, but so what kind of thing. It wasn't really brought up as such. Yeah.
Okay. What were your first interactions with religion? I'm not talking specifically about Islam here, but just generally. I mean, did you one day find yourself picking up the Bible or the Old Testament to find out about Judaism, or was was it through the internet or was it through debating? How?
In terms of religion more generally, the primary school I went to until the age of 11, it was a Church of England school.
Okay.
So we went to church a couple of times a year, but it's just a ritual. I don't think there were even any sermons or anything like that, and hymns at assembly, but there was no there was no sort of religious teaching in a sort of active way, and it wasn't really a part of my life. And I didn't really look into religions as such. I had. Obviously, the main religion around me in this country is Christianity. It's the one you hear the most about, and I was always very sceptical towards it. So in terms of looking at other religions, my perspective was, well, there are all these religions. I don't see any proof for them. Well, if there isn't any proof, look at Christianity, for example. There were things I saw that didn't make sense there. So I had very much a negative opinion of religion as a whole. So I didn't feel the need to go and search for anything. I didn't feel there's something missing as such that I needed a void that I needed to fill or anything like that.
Sure. Now, you mentioned that your background or your, if you like, your religious persuasion prior to Islam was as an atheist, atheism. So what triggered the interest? Because I know you were telling me earlier on about how you would love to engage in conversations about people's religions.
Yeah.
What fueled this, and what kind of discussions did you have?
I've always been quite enjoyed debates and so on, whether it's religion or politics or whatever. And I used to debate with Christian friends at school about Christianity, or I tried to, but quite often they were very evasive. They didn't want to answer my points, or they couldn't, and they tried to avoid it. And if they did answer, it was very much, "Can we move on, please?" So I always enjoyed that kind of debate, and I felt with Christians, like, I saw this thing in front of me and I thought, it doesn't make any sense. The Trinity was a particular problem for me, theologically, and so I'd try and get some answers, and I didn't find any. I was astounded that someone could believe this, and I wanted to see where they were coming from. In terms of Islam, I met a Muslim sister at a youth group I was involved in, and I thought, great, someone else to have an argument with, effectively. But different from my Christian friends who I try to debate religion with, a lot of what she said, I didn't agree with it because I was still an atheist, but I could see the logic there, and she was confident in what she was saying. She seemed to actually had some strength of convictions, and I found it quite interesting. So then I did a lot of reading on the internet, and that's what got me interested in the first place.
Okay, so before we go into this internet, and now we've got an idea as to how you actually found out about Islam through the internet, and we'll look into that in a bit more detail. I just wanted to pick up on the point you raised a bit earlier about how you would debate with Christians about the Trinity, because the Trinity didn't make sense. I'm a bit confused, and I'll tell you why. And that is because you said to me that you were an atheist. And I'm just trying to think, why an atheist? Because I was an ex-Christian and I had a concept of the Trinity. You know, right or wrong, I had a concept of the Trinity. Yet you were an atheist. And I guess you'd have to enlighten me, because obviously I'm being quite ignorant here. But I would guess, as an atheist, I wouldn't really care for what the Trinity was in the first place, because it's all a whole load of, rubbish, I would assume. Would be the response of an atheist anyway.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think, although I was an atheist, my view of religion is, well, I don't agree with it, but the only sensible idea of a religion is a monotheistic one. I don't know what my reasoning for that. It just made inherent sense to me. And if there were more than one God, there would be a lot of contradictions. And God is absolute. You can't have more than one absolute. That kind of thing. And then I'd look at the Trinity, and you've got three absolutes, but one created the other, but that's also the creator. There's so many things that I just couldn't get my head around, which we couldn't really fill in this time. But so I had this concept of what religion should say, and Christianity contradicted that from my perspective.
Sure.
So.
Okay. Alhamdulillah. Good. Thanks. Thank you for clearing that up. So we've got to a stage now where you've met this sister. You've had some debates with her, and you don't necessarily always agree. However, maybe the way in which she carries herself, the way in which she presented her arguments to you, the conviction in which she gave you her answers impressed you sufficiently enough for you to then want to go and find out more about Islam.
Yes. Yeah, I think I often got frustrated with Christians because they were, in a way, evasive. I didn't really feel that they were trying to answer the question as much as I thought was sufficient to get an answer, even if I wouldn't agree with it. But the sister, she actually, when I spoke to Christians, it was very much, how can you believe this? And Christians, quite defensive. When I was saying the similar sort of thing to her, she was actually saying, well, how can you not believe it? I was like, that's quite a different perspective to hear. It was quite refreshing. So I just found it quite interesting. And I've always been interested in finding out about different cultures and ways of life and so on. So I just, out of interest, decided to start researching it.
Okay.
So provoked by the sort of reactions and the convictions that she seemed to have.
So you now started clicking away on your computer.
Yes.
And I guess, whatever, Googled Islam or something like that, and came across, no doubt, tens of millions of websites. What were the first things that stood out at you when you first encountered some of these websites?
I can't remember how I found the websites that I did, but the sort of two main areas that I looked at. The first was science in the Quran and the miracles of the Quran, and there were some very good websites on that, and I just found it very interesting to read. And obviously it's in English and the Quran is in Arabic, but I'd read something and think, okay, I can see where it's coming from. Over time, that kind of grew to, yes, okay, to a degree, some of these could just be interpretations and translation being manipulation and so on. But when you look at the sheer bulk of it, a certain number of coincidences add up to something, there being some sort of overwhelming pattern there that you can't really ignore. So there was that aspect. The other aspect that I looked at was in terms of the fiqh, the jurisprudential rulings, which is kind of an odd route into Islam. It's kind of something you generally find afterwards. But I just found it was very appealing in that it was a comprehensive system, that it all made sense, it all linked up together. And I just found that really refreshing, whereas Christianity was very much a private affair that you keep out of your life in a way. So it's nice to have that different perspective.
Okay, so basically, as you said, and I was quite astonished when you said that, that the fiqh was one avenue for you to or if you like, a window into Islam for you, and you found it to be very holistic in its approach. When you say holistic, are you just talking about, for example, holistic in the sense that it, if you like, gives rulings for all of the day, if you like, the day of a Muslim, there is a rule for everything that he or she is to encounter in life, or holistic in the sense that it looks at it from the perspective of the individual, the community, the society, the global community as well?
I think predominantly it was from an individual of how you live your life yourself, but then there is the aspect of how to look after the environment and so on. It seemed to actually cover the issues, if you will. Okay. And a religion is, if God from an atheist perspective, okay, assume there's a God. Let's go back to, if there's a God, he created this earth for what, why, so that we can worship him, etc. If he did that, well, surely there would be some sort of guide of how to actually live on earth. Not just individually on how you deal with other people, etc., but also how you deal as a society as a whole, how you cope with the environment and that sort of thing. Okay. So it is holistic for the individual, but also holistically as humanity as a whole.
Sure. Okay, brilliant. And with regards to the science, because when you mentioned science, it reminded me of my quest, my research into Islam. And for me, it was like, wow. Again, yes, you could say it was down to the interpretation, but there were others that there was absolutely no way, shape or form you could deny that this, unless the Quran isn't the same Quran of back then, you've got no argument to it. For example, the development of the fetus in the womb of a mother. My question to you is related to my response at the time. And my response at the time was, wow, God has to go to this level just to try and plead to mankind to obey him. For the benefit of who? Not God, but for man himself. It was almost like I began to feel ashamed about the fact that all these years I'd been ignoring this Lord who's been throwing these proofs in my face, and I've been turning away from them. Now I've got to take notice of it. Otherwise I'm doing an injustice to everything. All of these efforts he's made. What was your response?
At first, there was a period of time where I found, looking back, it was kind of obvious that I was going to convert. I mean, the amount of reading that I was doing online, it was just ridiculous for an atheist who doesn't believe in God. It was to the point that, why would you do that? I was pretty much hooked in a way. I was just reading one page after another. And at the time, it was, I suppose, I didn't really think about what I was doing in terms of why am I doing this and so on. It was just sort of, I felt I needed to, for whatever reason. And then there was a very short period of time where I said, okay, I can see there are some arguments for the existence of God. And that was more on theoretical things in terms of the nature of God. So what I would call the purely monotheistic aspect that Islam presents, but also the need for a God's first cause principle, etc. There was that aspect as well. And then, so the science, it convinced me, but I hadn't acknowledged the fact, if you will.
Sure.
All of it together, the holistic, the way it shows you to live your life, the actual proof it's given, for example, in the science, and the logic of the arguments for a God in general. All of that together, then just one day, it suddenly hit me. I don't think there was any final thing as such, but one day it just hit me suddenly that actually you believe this. And I just, overwhelming feeling, it's like, you believe this, you're a Muslim. And then where do you go from here, if you will?
Sure. And obviously we know that this led you to convert, but before we actually talk about the conversion itself, I just wanted to focus a little bit. I know you converted at the age of 17.
Yep.
Prior to the age of 17, again, going back to the stories of some of the reverts who have been on the program previously, there were at least a number of aspects of their life that they knew they wouldn't be able to continue with after converting to Islam. This is not the type of show where we go into the details of what those things are, but in your case, as a 17-year-old, hot-blooded male, etc., I mean, did your life, or would your life have to dramatically change because of this understanding on your part that sooner or later you would have to become a Muslim?
It wasn't something I considered in a sense. I say it was pretty much just one day it dawned on me that I believed in it, and that was that. It's like, okay, you believe in Islam, you need to go and become a Muslim, whatever you need to do that. So it wasn't really something I considered as such. After converting, I don't think my lifestyle, in a sense, changed that much, other than going to the mosque, which I didn't do beforehand, obviously. I wasn't particularly interested in never went clubbing or anything like that. Very rarely drank alcohol, so it wasn't anything I was giving up or anything.
Pub crawl or anything like that? Okay.
No.
Alhamdulillah. So basically, in that sense, it was more of a natural progression for you. Even those that, obviously do these things, it becomes a natural progression as well. And so this day arrived where it dawned on you that, well, I actually believe in this. Technically, you're already a Muslim, arguably. But then I guess the question was, well, what do I do now? Yeah. And the answer that Gareth gave to Gareth was?
Well, I believe in this. I don't know what to do now. So I went back to the sister who I'd initially started talking to and said, I want to convert. And, which was totally out of the blue for her, because I hadn't really spoken to her at all about it.
Was she surprised? It might sound like a silly question.
She was, because we'd had these debates, and then however many months previously, and then this period of time, and then suddenly go back to her and say, hi, I want to convert, what do I do? So she then contacted her brothers, who sort of picked me up in the car and gave me an introduction, as it were, and then took me to the mosque a few days later.
Stick a black sack over your head and take you to a secret place.
It was slightly overwhelming. I told her online, and then had a phone call from her brothers that I'm coming to pick you up. So it's like, okay, this should be interesting. So so he came and picked me up and had a chat with me in his car, and then it's all right, okay, on I think it was a Thursday.
There weren't any guns involved or anything like that, no?
No, and then I think on the Saturday, on Saturday I'm taking you to the mosque and you're converting officially. It's like, okay. If you say so. It was kind of all at once. It was quite overwhelming. So
alhamdulillah, and on the Saturday they came to pick you up on the Saturday and took you to the mosque. They weren't wearing suits or anything like that, were they?
It was all a blur, to be honest. I can't remember the details.
No, I'm sure they weren't. Some may do. So they took you to the mosque, and was it a case of you standing up in front of the congregation in the mosque? And
I was quite fortunate that the microphone wasn't used. It was after there was a talk, and then afterwards went to the front of the sheikh and recited the shahada after him, obviously not knowing Arabic, recited it in English and then Arabic after him. Thankfully not with the microphone, just all the brothers around me, so it was it's quite a daunting experience, so it was nice to have it as quiet as possible. To say the Arabic when you're nervous and you've probably never said it before, and you probably don't always say it correctly the first time, and I've been there, we've all been there, I'm sure. And what happened, I mean, directly after you converted, what happened? Again, I'm just going back to when I converted many years ago. Directly after, it was 2 days before the next school year, so about 2 days later I went back to school and told my friends, which was out of the blue for them, but there's no problems in that aspect. And a month after I told my family. And
okay. Inshallah, what we do is we're going to go for a break now. When we come back from the break, I wanted to maybe just focus for a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes on the reaction of your parents and so on and so forth. And then inshallah we can look at what happened thereafter until today, inshallah. So far it's been very interesting, as always, of course. When we come back after this short break, we'll continue with the story of Gareth Quested as to how he became a Muslim and his formation or progression thereafter, inshallah. Please don't go away. Assalamu alaikum.